Govindamadi Purusham Dhammaham Bhajami. So the verses go on from there, but we'll get a sense for these first few verses, which are very important in the teachings of Vaishnavism, that Krishna is a person, and he's not an ordinary person. We can trace back our origin if we say, do you have a father? Yes. Does your father have a father? Yes. And you can keep going back until you come to the Adipurusha, or the father who doesn't have a father. And we come to Krishna, and what are his characteristics? They're described as he's Ishvara. So it means the controller. So everyone has some little bit of control in their life, not that much. But Krishna has absolute control over everything. He's the cause of all causes also. Ultimately, everything has a cause, and it all originates from Krishna. That's the first verse. Ishvara Parama Krishna Sakchit Ananda Vigraha. And also describes that he has a body. Sometimes people think the ultimate spiritual realization means to negate all variety of this world, because we, as we can reason, see that matter is disintegrating at all times, and therefore we find that it's an inferior nature. And therefore one might then conclude that the ultimate realization is to negate all form and all variety and come to the state of impersonal, an impersonal state. However, the opposite is true. All the variety that's in this world is a reflection of reality. And reality starts or is subsumed in Krishna. That is, everything emanates from Krishna, and his form is the primal form. And his body is not material. It doesn't deteriorate. It's Sat, Chit, and Ananda. It means it's eternal. It's also full of knowledge and full of bliss, or Ananda. Unlike this body, which is Asat, Achit, and Nirananda. It's temporary. It's not full of knowledge. It's ignorant. And it's also Nirananda. It's not very happy, this body. That source of trouble. So the subsequent verses we chanted then, just in very thumbnail summary, talk about the characteristics of the spiritual world. Krishna's not alone there. He's surrounded by unlimited numbers of devotees who are blissfully engaged in his service in an unlimited variety of activities. And also, it's mentioned very practically that Krishna can't be realized just by one's own mental power, or by becoming a yogi and becoming perfect at breathing or doing the triangle pose. One who is engaged in devotional service with a melted heart to Krishna because of association of pure devotees, to such a person, Krishna reveals himself. And he also, in these series of verses, revealed that Krishna has his own interests in the spiritual world. The primary of all of them is Srimati Radharani. And that's why we have Krishna, who's here playing the flute, alongside Srimati Radharani, his female counterpart, with whom he's eternally fascinated and engaged in pastimes. And this is the origin of all spiritual truth, which then is reflected in this world as the most interesting thing in this world is the attraction between male and female. However, because it's a reflection of reality, here it becomes a source of frustration ultimately. Whereas in the spiritual world, it's ever-increasing bliss. And that's why we worship Radha Krishna, because together they are the absolute truth. And next to Radha and Krishna, on our altar, we have Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And who is he? Sri Krishna Chaitanya Radha Krishna Nahi Anya. When Radha and Krishna combine together so that Krishna can taste what it's like to worship himself, because he realizes Radharani has more pleasure. The devotees have more pleasure because they're seeing me and my beauty, tasting my sweetness by worshiping me. Why can't I taste that? And he said, well, I'm God, therefore I can. So he comes as his own devotee. And we see Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu here on the left. He's holding his hands like this, which means he's giving benediction. So if anybody comes here, if you ever feel down in life, ever happen? Just come here and stand before Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he gives you like, okay, here, take this, no problem. You take some benediction. He is Radha and Krishna combined together, which is a very esoteric subject matter that devotees discuss ad infinitum, as Krishna's infinite. So that's something about the prayers that we chant and the deities that we worship on the altar. And it's very important to have a temple to come to because it's so easy with all the box stores lining the freeway and all the duties that we have in life to forget about the beauty of the spiritual world. And the purpose of a temple is to walk in and feel the environment for oneself, that there's something otherworldly about this place. You don't have to understand it all, but if you feel the mood and atmosphere of the place, it goes into your heart, and then you think, yeah, that's nicer than Home Depot. And maybe I'd like to go back there. We sing a lot of songs that are written in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is a beautiful language. It actually means that it's perfectly refined. It's not necessary to study Sanskrit to be in devotional service. You also don't have to know Sanskrit. But if you hear something about what it is, then you can appreciate a little bit the prayers. Many of the scriptures are written in Sanskrit. So it's a language that lends itself very well to poetic writing and also prose and straightforward writing, but it's highly refined language. Why does it lend itself to poetry? Thank you, Prabhu. Because it's highly metrical, and one can arrange it in various ways so that it all works out. That's a little harder in English because there are so many ragged edges. English is a confluence of several different languages, and they all have their exceptions to rules and so forth, lengths, and be that as it may, the songs we sing are those that have been passed down through the generations of teachers who have sung them, and there's a phenomenon described in the Bhakti teachings that there's a way in which when we receive songs, mantras, and other kinds of instructions from teachers who have realized them, they take on a different quality. And they become surcharged with a kind of spiritual energy. So in the system of practicing bhakti yoga, we don't do anything that's hodgepodge. We don't just take from anywhere and throw it in a pot and mix it up. But we take the specific teachings that have been passed down and recognized and therefore authorized by various luminaries, teachers, and also that follow, and this is the prerogative of great teachers, they follow what the original scriptures say. They don't make up anything new. However, they may say things in a unique way according to the culture that they're in so that people can understand it and more readily. So the next song we'll sing is a song that we inherited from Srila Prabhupada. And before he would sit in the morning and give class, well, let me just say that his schedule was such that he would take rest in the evening for a couple of hours. Maybe around 10 p.m. he would go to sleep and get up at midnight. And at midnight then he would begin his work with translating his books. And this morning I was listening to one of Prabhupada's sessions. It actually was just a few days before he left the world. and the main Sanskrit editor Pradyumna Prabhu, who was one of Prabhupada's disciples, who learned Sanskrit on the fly. Prabhupada saw that he was reading books about Sanskrit and learning the language, and then he would bring Prabhupada some translation. Prabhupada said, keep doing that. So Pradyumna did, and he excelled and became Prabhupada's chief Sanskrit editor. He's there, and several other devotees are there, and they're holding the microphone, which was to a device called a dictaphone. That time it was very advanced technology. And there was a way in which the Prabhupada would look at the commentaries and the translation, and he would then give his commentary, which is a way of weaving together the various commentaries of previous acharyas and offering it in the context of a particular verse. And in this case, Prabhupada's lying on his back, and because he's incapacitated, his physical body has basically withered to become practically not functional, to being not functional. And however, he was still reading the commentaries. They were holding them over his face, and he would look at them, and Pradyumna then would say the Sanskrit, and Prabhupada would hear it, and then he would give the commentary. And the verses, you can read that. That's in the 10th canto, 13th chapter, the last verses that Prabhupada was translating and commentating upon in his last days. And so he would create these commentaries, and every day he was writing his books. In healthier times, he would go to bed at 10, get up at 12, and then all night long he was translating, usually by himself. And then in the morning, he would go out for a walk, because he had had 2 heart attacks on the way to America, and that was on the ship called Jaladuta, water messenger. And then he met a doctor who said, you have to vigorously walk every day for your heart health. So Prabhupada never deviated from that. Wherever he was, he'd go for a walk. Many devotees would go with him, and he would stop at intervals and oftentimes comment about current events or anything that he felt like commenting upon. Then he would come back into the temple, and he would greet the deities as we did earlier, and then he would sit down, and then he would sing this next song. This song is written by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who is a predecessor guru. So the predecessor gurus passed down the message of Krishna from one to the next, and we worship them all as being part of an unbroken chain coming originally from Krishna. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur is revered by all modern Gaudiya Vaishnavas as being the one, as if like a relay station. The message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had been somewhat, wholly obscured or perverted, because over time it's the trend in the material world that everything degrades and falls apart. So he reintroduced Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings and was responsible for reviving the movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur then wrote extensively, over 100 books, and he had several deities that he worshipped in different places. He was a high court judge, like the Supreme Court, and they stationed him in various places, so he had a few places that he lived, and in those places he had deities. So he names them all in this song. So this is a song that Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote to worship his own deities. And it's a simple song, but Prabhupada used to describe it as a succinct description of the spiritual world. And that's why we have that picture above with Krishna in the spiritual world, enjoying with some of his devotees. So we'll sing this together, and then we'll discuss the Srimad-Bhagavatam. Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Janna Vallabha Jaya Girivaradhari. Jaya Gopi Janna Vallabha Jaya Girivaradhari. Jaya Jashodanandana Jaya Vraja Janaranjana. Jaya Jashodanandana Jaya Vraja Janaranjana. Jaya Jamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari. Jaya Jamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Girivaradhari. Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. In the next we're going to say in the English a couple of prayers that are called Mangalacharana. And this is done, you'll find in devotional gatherings, because whoever is speaking or involved in listening, and it's a 50-50 relationship. There's those who are given the duty to speak something, and then there's others that are given the duty to listen to it, and this creates a bond between the speaker and the audience through which there's cognition and awareness of Krishna. So this is one of the processes of bhakti. It's called Shravanam Kirtanam. Somebody either sings and everyone listens and then sings back, or we have somebody speak what they've heard from their gurus and from the Shastra, and then others listen. So equal duties, 50-50. Both are needed to support the system. However, both speakers and listeners, before speaking or listening, then ask for permission, because we don't take it for granted. In the modern scientific process, there can be a sense sometimes of strength that I'm going to use a crowbar to open up the secrets of the universe. Let me just get the jaws of life, and if it's strong enough, I can open it up and look in, and then I'll know everything. And what will be the result of that? I'll be a better controller. I'll have this knowledge I'll make a better iPhone. Apparently, we may have reached the pinnacle because nobody's satisfied anymore, no matter what you put on it. But in the mood of bhakti, which Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Bhakti mam abhijananti yavanyashmi, one can only know the complete truth if the truth personified, Krishna, reveals himself to us. So we approach in a humble mood, saying that really, who am I to even be here? I don't deserve to be here. I'm a recipient of mercy, and that's the only reason I'm allowed in. And that now I'm humbly begging that please may I have a drop of insight, mercy into your greatness so that I can serve you more. That's the mood of bhakti. And that's why you'll find in assemblies of devotees that they say these prayers ahead of time. So the first one says, I offer my respectful obeisances unto my spiritual master, who has opened my eyes, which were blinded by the darkness of ignorance with the torchlight of knowledge. So right now I'm doing a series of talks about idioms. Idioms are a kind of pithy statement, often or most likely they're cliche. In fact, we hear them so many times, we just let them pass by our ears. And one of the idioms we have in English is, don't bite the hand that feeds you. Have you ever heard that? Did you ever think about that one? Don't bite the hand that feeds you. I mean, you're being fed and then it's like, rah! In fact, people show, all kinds of videos now about pets. Or people, they find a stray somewhere and it's like, come on, I'm trying to help you. And there's like, bites the hand. So when we're taking instruction from a spiritual master who saves us, it's possible to have this phenomena which is called punar musika bhava. So there's a story about this. So once there was this person who was desirous of developing some spiritual stature. And it's described how he became overwhelmed by the pride that he developed when he had received spiritual knowledge and thought that he was independent, and therefore he lost it all. So it goes like this. A mouse once went to a great sage and said that I'm in a really dangerous condition because I'm a little mouse, tiny little ears, whiskers, small tail. I go around at night, and there are predatory animals out there that are very dangerous, and, could you help me? And Sadhu said, what would you like? He said, I'd like to become a cat because that sounds safer. So he said, become a cat. And boom. And then he came back a little while long after some days and said, "Oh, Sadhuji," sadhu means like a saintly person. And he said, "Please, can you help me again?" He said, "Yes. What can I do for you?" And he said, "Please let me become a dog because the dogs are chasing the cats." He said, "Okay." Boom, you're a dog. And then some while later, he came back and said, "Please help me again." I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "There's tigers out there. They're going after the dogs." He said, "Become a tiger." And now the tiger started looking at the sadhu. He said, "Why are you looking at me like that?" He said, "I'm thinking I could eat you." And the sadhu said, "Again, become a mouse." And that's what the phrase punar, again, musika, bhava. Bhava means to become, so become a mouse. And so there's a way to stay in the devotional mood always. Never think, okay, now I've become the big teacher, and we say this prayer to remember that it's my spiritual master that saved me. But what's the spiritual master saying? Same prayer to his or her spiritual master, that you saved me. And this is the way that the spiritual vibration comes down. It's through the humble heart of each teacher. None of the teachers think, "Oh, I am a great teacher." They all think that I am a humble follower. And that's why there's transmission and the message of bhakti can come down. So that's why we say this prayer. I offer my respectful obeisances unto my spiritual master, who has opened my eyes, which were blinded by the darkness of ignorance, with the torch light of knowledge. So don't bite the hand that feeds you, and also remember where you came from. And Prabhupada writes about this in one of his purports, is to remember where we all came from. Where were we before? Now that you've attained some status, don't start thinking like, "Hey, here I am." Stay always in a humble position. And from that humble position, then you can always be in grace by the mercy of Krishna. So this is the main objective of the devotees. It's called, or it's described, the practice by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in one of his famous verses, in which he said, you should try to be like a blade of grass. Oftentimes, I want to stand out. And I was like, yeah, I know. And he said, be the blade of grass. And the blade of grass, people walk across, makes a nice carpet for people to walk on. And the blade of grass, not going, hey, get off of me. It just bends, and it's like, yeah, please, put your feet here. And then he says, like a tree, be tolerant. If there are causes for provocation, like somebody insults you. In fact, I learned this the other day from a communicator. If somebody insults you, he said the topmost thing he's learned that you can say is, okay. Why, you stupid, rotten, okay. So tolerate. And always remain tolerant like a tree. And always show respect to others, but don't expect any respect in return. If you can practice this, then you can do bhakti. You don't have to be perfect at it, but you have to be ready for it and practice it as much as possible. That's the sum and substance of the practice of bhakti, is to be tolerant, to be humble, and to give respect to others. Why give respect to others? It's not artificial. Krishna and the living entity are within the heart of every living being. So when we see that, then we either mentally or bodily offer our respects. And it depends on the situation of each person, but we should see that that's the situation. Every living being is a temple, a walking temple. Some temples have become overrun with weeds and trees and all kinds of things, and others are pristine and clear, and you can see and hear Krishna coming out through the voice of the living entity who is within that body. But in all cases, we show respect. And this is the sum and substance of the practice of bhakti. Also, to give up envy of other living entities. There's no higher religious principle. Because if one gives up envy for others, then one can enter into hearing about Krishna. And this is mentioned in the Srimad-Bhagavatam itself. Nirmatsaranam Sutam. It's meant for people who have been able to overcome envy. And that's a good place to be in life, in which I don't envy others and I can simply hear. So before we go into the next stage of our process of worshiping by hearing and chanting, let's see if there's any reflections or questions about the process or anything that you heard that's stuck in your mind. Yes.
So, Guru Maharaj, when when we were, seeing to the deities, so you mentioned that Krishna is the Adi Purush, which means that everyone has a father, but when we go to Krishna, he doesn't have a father. And yet he accepts Nanda Maharaj as his father. I don't know, at that point I was a little confused that, he has no father, but then he has a father. So, in the spiritual world, does he have a father?
Well, you're not alone. Kunti Devi said a similar thing in her prayers. This is very bewildering, how you are actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead, yet you interact with the world. He's known as Janani Vaso. He walks among everybody else and acts like one of the people in the clan. Yes, he has a father, but this is speaking on two different levels. One is we're speaking about tattva. Tattva means to understand the categories of truth. There's things that there are categories of truth, and one of the categories of truth that's very important is to understand that there is a God and I'm not him, and that Krishna is that supreme controller. That's his eternal position, and our eternal position is that we're servants of Krishna. In fact, this is the first teaching that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives to Sanatana Goswami, one of his chief disciples, a highly qualified person. And then he tells him the first thing is that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Supreme Controller, and we're all servants. So understand that truth. Then you can understand the other category of truth, which is called rasa, or the way in which the Absolute Truth enjoys himself. And so relationships are the most enjoyable. And there are several different relationships that we enjoy and we see in this world. One of them is that we enjoy appreciating others. You can just sit there and go like, that's cool. And that's called shantaras. You're not doing anything about it, but you just think like, yeah, I like that guy. And then above that, there's an urge. You feel that it's like, I should give him a glass of water. And then you get up and you get the glass of water and you bring it in. And that's called dasiras. And that's more active and it has more qualities to it because you get to do something for the person. And just above that becomes a friendly ras because the person you bring a glass of water to start noticing, hey, it's the third day in a row he brought me a glass of water. And the person looks at you and goes like, I acknowledge you, you're doing something for me. And then they start to appreciate one another in a friendly way. And this is one of the relationships or the truths of relationship that's there in the spiritual world is a friendly relationship between Krishna and others. And there are many varieties. It's not that it's stereotype, but there are various categories of friends and deeper friendships and friendships in the city, friendships in the town, and so forth. And then beyond that, there's a relationship that parents have with children, children have with parents, which is a very deep rasa. We look at it in this world sometimes and wonder, like, is there anything more intense than a mother's love for the child? In fact, oftentimes, the teachers of bhakti will point to the parents' relationship with the child and say, this resembles bhakti. Because you notice the mother, especially the mother, will be on call 24/7 for the entire life of the child. Either physically present or mentally present. That the mother never forgets or is inattentive even for a second for the child, always thinking about the welfare of the child and things like that. And so this relationship is there in the spiritual world also. In fact, that's where it originates. So Krishna, in order to appreciate that relationship and have rasa, which means to have the enjoyment of the relationship, because all enjoyment comes from relationship, then he acts as a child. And he has a mother, Yashoda, who's always worried about him. He calls one day, Krishna, I got a report that you ate dirt. And Krishna said, I didn't eat dirt. They're lying. And Yashoda, his mother, says, no, but I have 2 accounts. Eyewitness. Krishna said, okay, first of all, they saw that I was going to leave the playing and it was going to ruin the game. So preemptively, they said they're going to file a false claim that I ate dirt. He said, no, but your brother also, Balaram. He said also. He said, Balaram's also lying. And she has this discussion with her little child. And there's a very sweet mood there because simultaneously we're talking about the category of truth we already discussed, which is Krishna's the supreme controller, but he's acting as a child. Of course, those who enter deeply within this enjoyment of relationship, they forget that he's the supreme controller, because if that mood is present, then it's not possible to enjoy the mood of, but it's true that he is the supreme controller. And all the inebrieties that we find in this world of being a parent to a child, or a friend to a friend, or a servant to somebody else, the kinds of obstacles that we run into that ruin the relationship eventually, or that taint it to some degree, aren't there in the spiritual world, because Krishna is perfect. He's the absolute truth, and he has all the features of eternality, bliss, and knowledge. However, when he avails himself to these relationships for his own enjoyment, then his devotees also enjoy with him in these various relationships. And in that category of truth, he has mother and father, and he engages in these childhood pastimes, and then pastimes as a young boy, pastimes as an adolescent. That's as far as he goes, because adolescence is where everyone wants to stay. But Krishna, that's his eternal form as an adolescent. And then there are relationships in this world that everyone's searching for on whatever they're called, dating.com or some match.com. Everyone wants to match up with a male or female counterpart somehow or other, because we don't feel complete in the world until we have somebody to reinforce our false ego that, yeah, you're really cool. However, in Krishna's case, there's no limitation, because he is really cool, and he gets cooler every day that we see him. This is one of the main features of the spiritual world, is wonderment. And that is not because you have a different mindset or because you see the person in a new light, literally, but because Krishna's qualities are ever increasingly beautiful and wonderful, and therefore those who enter into a loving relationship with him as boyfriend, girlfriend, and so forth, they're always seeing something new in him, and they're enjoying that kind of intimacy. That's something that takes a while to understand, because people say, yeah, I get it. That's what I do. It's not what you do. It's completely different. It's a completely different category, because what I do in this material world, on these various relationships, is in relationship with the body, and it's based on my illusory concept that I am my body, and they are my kith and kin, and that this is my lover, and so forth. And it's, you may say, well, they're both metals, but one is gold and the other one's iron. So the relationships we talk about, Krishna having a father and mother, these are part of the esoteric truth of Krishna in the spiritual world, called rasa tattva. And when we talk about Krishna having no father and mother, this is another category of truth, where we're talking about the ontological position of God and Krishna. Is that all right? Okay. Is there another comment or question? Yes.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj.
Yes. Go ahead, Nanavari.
Accept my humble. Thank you, Hare Krishna. Please accept my humble obeisances to you, Jai Srila Prabhupada. Thank you for a wonderful class. My question is, when you just mentioned that Krishna, we have relationship and different type of relationship in material world, and I know Krishna is a different one. So should we, when we are maintaining, I know this is not good, like then it says we are enjoying, we shouldn't be enjoying this relationship because it's material, but then how do we differentiate, like we should not enjoy this, even though I know it's not good, but how do we understand? I know Krishna has spiritual, but when we have like motherly or friends, any kind of relationship in this world, again, would you talk about it, please? I know it's a silly question, but I always had this question in my mind.
We give $100 for each silly question. Let me check and see if I have it. Unfortunately, yours doesn't qualify for the $100. We're in a conundrum. We're living in material body. We already have relationship with the material world. Nonetheless, we've begun to awaken our relationship with the spiritual world, meaning with Krishna and all of his associates. Therefore, we have dual citizenship. And that requires balance. Therefore, as we're practicing devotional service, we have to be aware of how to artfully live in both worlds at the same time. It's not possible to give up our affection for family. And if one does try to do that artificially, he or she will snap back. Just like people who say, I'm going to fast. I'm overweight, I'm just going to fast. I won't eat for 3 days. And then you see them 4 days later and they're eating popsicles. Creamy popsicles. And a lot of them. Because the senses are like very demanding characters. And if you cheat them, then they come back and they say, give me more. You cheated me, and I know you cheated me, and you know that I know you cheated me, and now you're going to pay. So one has to be very careful how one walks through the world and performs devotional service. And therefore, in our relationships with our family, with our children, with other people in society, we have to maintain a level of appreciation for the fact that they have feelings. And I also have feelings. So Krishna says in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, Tavat karma nakuravita na nirvidyeta yavata matkata shravanadova shraddhayavan najayate. Until one has developed a complete taste for hearing and chanting, then one has to very artfully maintain the protocol of the material world. And how does one do that? Well, there's different levels of realization. We should have spiritual strength that as we're interacting with family members, with members of society and so forth, we should have an abiding awareness that actually we are just passing through. We're all in this together. Meanwhile, if I try to project that to my family, and for instance, if a family, mother and father say to their child, you're not really my child. You're just a living entity. And so snap out of it and, be more spiritual. if you withhold love or affection from children, it's kind of like fasting from just saying, I'm going to fast, and then later you'll be eating popsicles. So you have to understand how everyone has psychological, emotional needs, and therefore part of being in devotional service is to be able to artfully stay in the world that you're in now, and in the context that you're in now, and interact with people in a reasonable and responsible way. Responsible means parents have to give affection to their children. Spouses have to give real affection to their spouses. You have to give attention to your boss, otherwise you'll be fired. It's like, I'm busy, I got to chant my rounds. And they're like, I don't know what rounds means, but I do know what it means that you didn't show up for 3 days. So you're fired. So we have to walk in both worlds, and therefore the Sri Upanishad gives us this commonsensical advice, vidyam cha yes? And the meaning is? Roughly, okay.
One who can learn the process of nescience and knowledge side by side can transcend this world and attain immortality.
And how does it relate to our conversation?
It relates to our conversation because we were talking about two different things about knowing that all of our relationships, or like the only lasting relationship is with Krishna, so that's actual knowledge. And I guess we can compare nescience to being still involved in bodily relationships, but being able to maintain a balance of both, a healthy balance of both, is where you'll be fulfilled.
Nicely done, thank you. Tavat karmana kuravita nanirvidyeta yavata matkata shravanadova shradayavana jayate. However, as one walks through this world and the different phases of his or her life, he or she will notice that one's heart begins to change. Simultaneously, one's external situation in life begins to change. This is the genius of the Varnashrama system. There's a category recognized for the phases of life for every person that you can fit into. For instance, in the beginning of life, one is bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and wants to learn things and can learn things very readily, and goes into ashram situation where there's no distraction. Just like our Anshu and Balaram just came back from Denver, Colorado, where they entered into the brahmacharya ashram deeply. And is Anshu here? Anushri's here. Did he like it? He wants to go back. Okay, nobody else can go out. He wants to go back because there's a sense. Well, tell us anything you can say. What did he feel? Why does he want to go back?
He said the devotees were very caring and loving towards him, and they accepted, they treated them like special guests. And then also, he said they were planning when to go back next already. So that was, yeah.
That's indicative, right? Thank you. So in the early life, when one gets an opportunity to perform devotional service without any distraction means making money and lovey-dovey, all kind of lovey-dovey stuff like, hey, you like me? I don't know. Do you like me? Blah, 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 blah. Should we? Shouldn't we? Yeah, blah, blah, blah. And all that stuff, major distraction. You save that until you've finished your, everything that you can do for giving full concentration, recording it all, taking in that love from the devotees who have no other agenda in life except just to serve Krishna. You should know what that feels like, because you keep that with you the rest of your life, and I'm happy. I can be happy. It's not theoretical that you don't have to know calculus and be the top earner in the country to be happy or prove yourself in any other way. You can be satisfied with a little mat and a set of Bhagavatams and sit down and eat khichdi with your friends. Bas, kirtan, you're happy. And that comes in the beginning of life, and then even if you get it for a week, you'll carry it in your heart for the rest of your life, and you'll know that's real life. And then then there's a phase of life you go into where it's a safe environment in which you can enter into a relationship, man with woman, have children, and in that relationship you can thrive and express all the emotions that are there within your heart for your family, for your 52 cousins, and all that's there. At the same time, you have permission within that ashram to maintain a very strong focus on Krishna. It's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and my primary duty in life is to finish my rounds, and so forth. Then, after that, you start getting old, and 60 is the youth of old age. 50 is a early time you can jump in and start transitioning more into let me just depend more on Krishna. Whatever comes, comes. And you can reason. Throughout my life, I've never starved. Throughout my life, I've never wanted for anything. I always caught a ride wherever I wanted to go, whether it was in the early days of hitchhiking or Uber. Everything's always lined up. Why do I have to work so hard? I don't need extra. I just need service. And then husband and wife can transition into that mode. And then for those special circumstances, if one needs more focus isolation, you can even have an arrangement for sannyas and so forth. So all these are given as ways in which to move in the world, be protected in your practice of devotional service, and at the same time remain totally focused on the goal of life. And just as we heard from our Pundit circle, Vidyam cha yas, and explained by Avantika, the meaning of it, this is necessary, actually. We have to walk in the world. You're not going to just walk right out of it in a second. But as you're walking through, if side by side you perform devotional service, you'll get even more realization. Example, you're doing devotional service, let's say working for a festival, very absorbing. What are you doing? Let's say you're making garlands. You've transported yourself to the spiritual world. You're sitting in one room making garlands with other Vaishnavas. And then the beauty of the situation. Why are we making these garlands? Because we want to decorate Krishna, his beautiful body. And then all you hear for 3 days is Hare Krishna. And all you smell, incense and prasadam. All you talk to, devotees. Then you walk out on the street and you see people walking along and scrounging for a little happiness in life, and you think, oh my God, this thing's still going on out here. And you see the difference, and then you have to go to work, and you walk in to Salesforce, and there's a huge screen in the lobby, and there's like, like, produce more. And everybody's got this, idea, and you're like, wow, the contrast is stark. And so, and then you start to see how to categorize these two things, work in relationship with them, and you figure out how the Bhagavad Gita teaches, don't give up your work, keep working, but work in an enlightened way. And you start to see, actually, this technology works. And therefore, you become very, very confident of yourself. And by the time the work in the material world diminishes enough, so then you feel this strength, yoga balena, that yes, I can give myself more and more to the practice of devotional service without any worries at all. I developed that strength. So this is the process that we go through to come to a perfect life and to leave the world in full absorption of the spiritual world and of Krishna. Right, Priya Kishori? She's doing it. Okay. What else?
Thank you so much, Guru Maharaj. Hare
Yes.
Krishna. Very nicely explained. Thanks a lot.
Hare Krishna. Oh, yes, Gita Priya. It was a tie goes to the runner on the last one.
I was also kind of reflecting on what Pavani Bhakti Mataji said this morning. When you, for 30 seconds, you asked us to just be helpless, like before Japa Circle, and you asked us to just be helpless and, just give it to Krishna. And I was really reflecting on that recently. And I was thinking that Krishna already, he already has your life planned out. Like, you don't need to worry about like your future, because if Krishna wants you to have a good future, you'll have a good future. Like, there's no denying that. And I was just kind of like, why are you like so worried? Like, Krishna will like, he will see to it. Like, you can just stop stressing so much. Like, I was like, okay, don't mess up your grades, or don't like just like not focus on school. But at the same time, like, don't stress about it too much.
Don't worry too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. Others in this vein.
Oh, it is on. Sorry. For the question, I believe it was Danavari Mataji that asked. That was something that I was really, I guess, earlier struggling with, trying to find like that balance between relationships here and like making them spiritual. And I was listening to this class by Tanya Gorangi Mataji, who's actually I think she's a family therapist or something. So she speaks a lot about relationships, and she was talking about how most of the relationships that we truly care about and value and love, for all of those, it's never actually related to the body, because it wouldn't matter how they look. You love their heart and soul. So in order to cultivate relationships that are beyond the body and spiritual and actually connect to each other's soul, you can do like the 6 devotional exchanges that we learn about in the Nectar of Instruction, such as sharing your heart, doing anything spiritual, and that makes those relationships spiritual.
Oh, yeah, such good points. Thank you very much. Yeah. Was that interview? Was that an interview that she had? Danya?
No, I don't think so. But I've also seen that.
Seen the interview also. Yeah, she gives really nice points, and it also is a demonstration of being able to take a so-called worldly skill of knowing, counseling, relationships, and so forth, and then when it's applied to the science of devotional service, then you get this insightful balance that you can actually use, because most people don't ask philosophical questions. They ask questions about, how do I make this work in my life? In my particular circumstance, how do I make it work? Yes? Hare Krishna. We need the tech team.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. My question is that on one hand we are told that we should see Krishna in everyone, because Krishna is actually present in everyone. And on the other hand, we are asked not to associate more with non-devotees. So all the time we are not surrounded by devotees, but there are times, there are provoking situations when non-devotees say some things which we are not able to really digest, and our vision gets blurred. So how to fix up our vision of seeing Krishna in everyone at all times?
Well, give me an example. What is the kind of thing does somebody say that you can't digest? And let's see if we can digest it together.
One of my husband's friend, he was just telling one day that, you read Bhagavad Gita as per the Pandavas. So I have Bhagavad Gita.
As per the Pandavas?
I mean, it's basically, Krishna is actually taking side of Pandavas, because Pandavas were right, and he was on the side of the truth, and he was not on the side of Adharma or the Kauravas. He did not take side of Kauravas and did not fight on their behalf.
So far, so good.
So these people will be telling that, no, you do not know that Kauravas were also good, things like that, and I don't want to engage myself in those discussions at all. So I just told them that I don't have that.
Said the Kauravas are also good. That's what he said. They're both good. There's good people on both sides. Sometimes people say something like that. Go ahead.
So I told that if you want more on this, more details on this, then you can visit the temple. Then there are many elevated devotees where you can actually get proper knowledge. I don't have that knowledge. So then after a while, I feel that I feel quite disturbed, that why do they say so much about that Krishna was this, Krishna was that, he was flirty, he was this, he was that.
He was what?
He was flirty and he was this
Flirtatious.
He had so many wives. He had
Right.
many
Okay, well, this is Prabhupada used to say a little bit of learning can be dangerous. He used to say like a little Sanskrit learning can be dangerous because sometimes people know a little bit, and then because they know a little bit, but they don't have context for the knowledge that they have, then it becomes a little dangerous. So this is a very particular problem for those who grow up in Indian culture. In fact, we see it a lot. I remember one incident when I was in Irvine, California. I was going door to door, and we were selling Bhagavatam sets and whatever else people would take. And so I went upstairs. There was a Gujarati couple, and they were very put offish about the Bhagavatam. In fact, the woman of the house said, these are all just stories. And no matter how we presented or pleaded, they had a force field, especially she did, around her heart. And her husband is like, whatever she says is whatever I have to do. So I went away from there feeling dissatisfied. So I can relate to how you feel. I know how that feels. You feel, I wasn't potent enough to overcome that kind of, sense that I already know everything, and I know, and I don't want it. That type of mood. It's very frustrating, right? So then I went downstairs, and there were these 4 Muslim students from some Muslim country. I'm trying to remember what it was called. Brunei or something like that. Brunei. And they had the traditional Muslim clothes on. Young students. I think they were going to the San Jose State or something like that. And they saw me at the door, dhoti, tilak and everything. And I said, Salam alaikum. Alaikum salam, matava, kifelak, alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar. And they were like, hey, come in, And we sat down. They're eating chicken, and they're drinking Coca-Cola. But then I started telling them about Bhagavad Gita. And I just said, there is a supreme person, and there is a purpose to life. It's totally spiritual. And they were like, everything I said, they were getting so pumped up that, look, here's an American guy, and he's talking about God. And I just presented the Bhagavad Gita in universal terms, and they were also ecstatic that every one of them bought a Bhagavad Gita. They all wanted their own copy. As you can see, it's them, not me. I said the same thing I said as everybody else. It's just they were open. So Krishna says this, Samaham sarvabhuteshu nami dveshtosti na priya. I say the same thing to everybody. But some people, like the Pandavas, can take it. Other people, the Kauravas, like, nah, not so much. I want to do my own thing. Dhritarashtra, everyone went to him, including Akrura, said, like you're blowing it big time. And he's like, I know I am, but I still got to do it. And this is a problem. That's the problem, the only problem. And that's pervasive in the material world, so don't feel discouraged. People are like that in the material world because there's this deep-seated sense that I want to be independent from God. One thing after another happens in the sojourn of the life of a living entity in the material world, the best of which is to meet a Vaishnav and get some sense that, like, wow, I actually like that person. And what are they doing? And then there's a kind of change of heart that takes place. It doesn't necessarily happen philosophically that you convince the person. No, Pandavas, Kauravas, different, this, that, you don't understand. Of course, that can help sometimes with certain types of people. It's not stereotype. But generally, after some time, people develop a different mood and change of heart. And they can become more receptive to Krishna consciousness. But it's not you, necessarily, although we always, when we go out to teach Krishna consciousness or go in, you're with your family and you're trying to impart it to other people. That's particularly hard in family contexts. People, I already got this down. I know what's what, and you don't tell me, I tell other people. And in those types of relationships, it's not so productive to go into deep philosophical points. In fact, only when somebody actually has a little opening do we find that it becomes productive. Even among students, those who say, like, I surrender. And then you say, well, how much are you going to surrender? And like, how much can you hear? Like, you'll get a letter from somebody who's, in a student relationship, and there's no question mark. Because, like, I don't want to ask a question because you might answer it. In fact, I had that situation with somebody who was, wanted to enter into a marriage. It was an ill-advised marriage, and we sat, and he was telling me all about it. I didn't say a word. And then we sat there for 5 minutes in silence. Living entities are smart. They know. And it's like, and I finally broke the silence against the, with that rule. What's that book called? About war? The Art of War or whatever. Huh?
Sun Tzu, Art of War.
Yeah, you're not supposed to speak first. Anyway, I spoke first. I said, do you know why I'm not saying anything? And he said, yeah. I said, you haven't asked a question. So how can I say anything? So, you find that resistance with a capital R is there everywhere in the material world. So if you find it in your personal circle, don't be surprised because it's everywhere. You don't find it here so much because everyone signed up for it. They already figured it out. Bahunam jamanamante jnanavamam prapadyate. After many, many births of death, they're like, give me the sheet. I'm signing it. I'm signing up for this relationship. Krishna, you speak, representatives speak, I listen, and then I first accept it, then I work it out. And other people haven't come to that. They haven't evolved to that position yet. So do not worry. Okay? All right. 1, 2.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. As you were saying that I of course have about 21 cousins, and I requested everybody that we can read Bhagavad Gita together. So I had about 10 of them come, and I was really fearing about a few things. I didn't want any of their parents to come because my aunts and uncles are not very, they have a lot of, they feel they already know a lot. But I did have a couple of the aunts and uncles come. And the first day we started doing Brahman Dharma Kshetra, Kurukshetra, and as soon as I started, the first, almost 1 hour over, and then my uncle said, why do you always say Krishna did the right thing? Because Duryodhana is also very good. So then I was just fearing that thought. And then I just tried to explain him. It went about half an hour. And then since my cousins stay in different parts of the world, we said, okay, we will meet next week and we will continue the discussion. So all my cousins were like, chatting away, like, wow, we're waiting for this war. Why? We're excited. You're going to talk about Arjuna being better. He's going to be talking about Duryodhana being better. Well, that was scaring me. I said, I'm going to try to represent, because my cousins are very open. They want to take, whatever I tell. So I was just praying to Krishna, and I went through all these lectures about Duryodhana and Krishna. The whole week I was meditating, praying. I said I should talk sense, and I started talking. That next week my uncle didn't speak a word, and I was just thinking maybe at some point he's going to go off. But at the end he told me that one thing I realized. I thought, no, I was so worried. He's like, I think even though you're younger than me, I think you have read more Shastra than me. It all happened because of Krishna. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can never imagine this happening in my family. So then he started telling my aunt. So my aunt is also coming regularly. But I just wanted to mention to you that I think, not everybody is ready. But sometimes, even though I didn't want them to come, Krishna had a different plan. So I was so thankful that I could go over all the Shastric words or lectures. I just wanted to share the truth. Thank you.
And Prabhupada once said about Indians that if you scratch a little bit, right below the surface, you'll find the Krishna consciousness. I remember this in my memory. I used to have this booth at the airport in San Francisco. And, people come over to my booth, or I'd call them over, and there was an Indian man, and he's like, I don't believe all this. He said, I'm an atheist and stuff. So, but I kept telling him Krishna consciousness, and then gradually he was like, okay, I'll take it. He was like, that didn't take so long, It's like right below the surface. And yeah, it is important if you have a context in which you're the teacher and you can go on speaking, then these kinds of transformations take place. That's why, as they say, that's why we play the games. Otherwise, we wouldn't go out and teach Krishna consciousness. And you're always, I mean, it's the most interesting sport you can engage in. It's like, what's going to happen next? Who's the next person who's going to surprise us and say yes, and then the other person says no, then we don't know. But we do know that people close the door on Lord Nityananda and on Advaita Acharya. It's like, oh, no thanks, not interested. So, it's a glorious service.
I just have a question, Prabhu. I was just thinking that in the earlier conversation we were having, Queen Kunti says that she considers all her relatives as parts and parcels of Krishna rather than somebody connected to her body. Well, I've been trying to remind myself this over and over again. But the thought, I realize the difference between a person who is totally Krishna conscious and a person who's more materialist. I'm looking at something for myself in the relationship in the material world. But in the spiritual world, I'm not looking for anything for myself. How do we get to the situation where even in the material world, with our own family or extended family, we don't look for what we want?
Go on with your Krishna consciousness, and all contexts and situations will change in time by the power of Krishna's mercy and the changing context as well. I've said it millions of times about this with my own family, so I won't go into great detail, but I had a very close relationship with my mother and father, and my father left first, and then I was with my mother, and right before my eyes, I saw our relationship change. It was not possible to impart any Krishna consciousness except for the example of my life, and of course, Nira Akula, she was very close to her, and so forth. But, at a particular time when the opening was there, she changed, and she became no longer my mother, and she was a living entity inquiring and saying, what do I do now? And accepted the process. And so if you go on, you'll find just like there's butter in milk, but you can't see it. But if you keep churning it, then all of a sudden, like, hey, it came out. So Krishna consciousness is a churning process. You have to keep churning, and then everything will clarify and come in its right category in due course of time by the mercy of Krishna. Gandharvika.
The sentence that you read 3 times at the beginning of Japa workshop, it just got stuck in me, and it was so encouraging. You said how the chanting of Hare Krishna removes unwanted habits. So, but I was just thinking on that, Prabhu, and there is also, we have this disclaimer at the bottom of the 10 offenses and how we chant. All those things implied in that statement, or it's just, it doesn't matter, I just keep continuing and then the unwanted habits go away.
Aparada palam papam kutam bijam. I'm sorry. No, that's wrong verse. Anta? No, different verse. I'm talking about if you're committing offense, go on to chanting. Nama parada yuktanam naman yeva harantyagam avishrani paryuktani nam ye varta karani cha. So Padma Purana says that if you're chanting with offense, the solution, chant more. There's a interesting twist to that, because there's a way in which if you're making offenses, it's very difficult to chant more, because you start thinking that, movies look better than chanting. And so you have to keep going somehow or other. Don't succumb to this idea that if it's not perfect, then I'll stop doing it and do something else. That doesn't work either. So you have to keep the vibration going. Keep the transcendental vibration going. And if you can get the shelter of a Vaishnava and take a vow and say, I respect this Vaishnav, I'm going to work under this Vaishnav. You take initiation and then you say, okay, the Vaishnav said it, so I'm going I'm going to fulfill my vow no matter what. Then you're safe for life, because at least you have dry ground to come up to, that no matter what else happens, I'm going to finish my vow. And then the perfection of the chanting, we have to adjust ourselves in our lifestyle as much as possible, mostly by getting good association. Put yourself in good association, and naturally by the influence of the hearts of advanced Vaishnavas, then our hearts start to change and we start to value new things. Just like within any other aspect of our life, whomever you associate with, you'll become like, and that will become your values in life. And so keep going. Don't stop. Do more. Try to find times when you can chant more too. Like if you do some vrats, everyone knows if you go to a japa retreat, you come back a changed person. 3 days and you come back and like, yeah, I renewed. Everyone's looking at you like, you're different now. Like, yeah, because I had different association, different focus. What if you did it for a month? What would happen to you then? Look what happened to Chitraketu, huh?
I said unwanted habits will go away.
Yeah, and if they happen to linger, then don't be discouraged. Because Krishna says in the Bhagavatam that Jata Shradama Katasu Nirvina Sarvakarmasu Veda Dukkha Makankamam Prityagepya Nishvara Tato Bhajeta Mam Prita Shradalur Jadanishjaya Jushamanam Statankamams Dukho Darkams Jagarayan. You can be a little bit remorseful, but not pathologically, so that you said, like, I'm no good and I can't do this. That's bogus. You can't claim, nobody can claim to be permanently unqualified. You can rise in due course of time, and you do have power of decision. So just make the right decision and Krishna will help you. Om Tat Sat. Okay, so let's hear a little bit from the Srimad-Bhagavatam, and then we'll have some more kirtan and prasadam for everybody in San Mateo, Santa Clara, Contra Costa, Alameda counties. Call your friends. Today, I'm going to read a verse which is a perennial favorite from the Srimad-Bhagavatam, first canto, 5th chapter, 18th verse. I'll say, please repeat. Tasyaiva heto prayateta kovido. Nalabhyate yad brahmatam uparayada. Talabhyate dukhavadanyata sukham. Kalena sarvatra gabira ramhasa. Tasya. For that purpose, eva, only, heto, reason, prayateta, should endeavor, kovida, one who is philosophically inclined, lalabhyate, is not obtained, yet, what? Brahmatam, wandering, upari ada, from top to bottom, tat, that, labhyate, can be obtained, dukhavat, like the miseries, anyata, as a result of previous work, sukham, sense enjoyment, kalina, in course of time, sarvatra, everywhere, gabira, subtle, ramhasa. Translation. Persons who are actually intelligent and philosophically inclined should endeavor only for that purposeful end, which is not obtainable even by wandering from the topmost planet, Brahmaloka, down to the lowest planet, Patala. As far as happiness derived from sense enjoyment is concerned, it can be obtained automatically in course of time, just as in course of time we obtain miseries, even though we do not desire them. Purport. Every man everywhere is trying to obtain the greatest amount of sense enjoyment by various endeavors. Some men are busy engaged in trade, industry, economic development, political supremacy, etc. And some of them are engaged in fruitive work to become happy in the next life by attaining higher planets. It is said that on the moon, the inhabitants are fit for greater sense enjoyment by drinking soma ras, and the Pitraloka is obtained by good charitable work. So there are various programs for sense enjoyment, either during this life or in the life after death. Some are trying to reach the moon or other planets by some mechanical arrangement, for they are very anxious to get into such planets without doing good work, but it is not to happen. By the law of the Supreme, different places are meant for different grades of living beings, according to the work they have performed. By good work only, as prescribed in the scriptures, one could obtain birth in a good family, opulence, good education, and good bodily features. We see also that even in this life, one obtains a good education or money by good work. Similarly, in our next birth, we get such desirable positions only by good work. Otherwise, it would not so happen that two persons born in the same place at the same time are seen differently placed according to previous work. But all such material positions are impermanent. The positions in the topmost Brahmaloka and the lowest Patala are also changeable according to our own work. The philosophically inclined person must not be tempted by such changeable positions. He should try to get into the permanent life of bliss and knowledge, where he will not be forced to come back again to the miserable material world, either in this or that planet. Miseries and mixed happiness are two features of material life, and they are obtained in Brahmaloka and in other lokas also. They are obtained in life. They are obtained in life of the demigods, in the life of the demigods, and also in the life of dogs, the dogs and hogs. The miseries and mixed happiness of all living beings are only of different degree and quality, but no one is free from the miseries of birth, death, old age, and disease. Similarly, everyone has his destined happiness also. No one can get more or less of these things simply by personal endeavors. Even if they are obtained, they can be lost again. One should not therefore waste time with these flimsy things. One should only endeavor to go back to Godhead. That should be the mission of everyone's life. Om Tat Sat. Hare Krishna. Just to see if you have any points you want to bring from the purport. Yes. Give Raj a mic, please. We guarantee a mic in 10 seconds or less, or your money back from this class.
I was just really thinking about the verse here. It says that happiness comes automatically, just like miseries come. So it's just so. It's kind of funny because we all try for happiness so hard, but we never really try for miseries. So actually, if we just become equipoised towards the miseries and the happiness, then we'll actually be happier anyway, like internally, because we just know it's going to come. We don't have to strive either way. Anyway, I was just reflecting and thinking about how I try for happiness so much, or I try to get my material situation together for happiness so much, and I don't do so for the miseries, but they come anyway, and the happiness, and I can, if I just like really take shelter of this verse, that the happiness will come, then it just kind of takes a whole lot of self-pressure off your shoulders. It's like, oh, I don't really have to try that hard for the happiness. It's just going to come anyway.
Yes. Nice points, and I loved how you said being equipoised is important. And there's a phrase that I've taken on that helps me to remember that process, which is to be methodical but dispassionate in our works in the world. Do your due diligence, because if you don't, then you can be waylaid from the process of devotional service to some extent because you didn't do your due diligence and somebody catches up to you and says you forgot to sign this paper and therefore ... fill in the blanks. But if you do your due diligence but you remain dispassionate about it as you go forward, whatever result comes, that's up to destiny. And at least you did your due diligence and you can go on with your process of devotional service. Yes, for the bringing more nuance. Manjula Kanta.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. Maharaj, when we say that happiness and what is the other one? Miseries, they come of their own accord. I was thinking that even though we strive for some and we try to avoid the other, when they do come, we do experience them, right? We actually go through the misery or the happiness. It's not like we can avoid it just because we have done our due diligence. There is this attachment to both these ends, whereas the Shastra says detach.
It's a matter of consciousness, because if one is in Krishna consciousness, although so-called miseries may come or so-called happiness may come, a person, as we heard this morning, who has a higher taste, isn't really affected by such things. Truly isn't. And it's not a matter of just like, I'm going to adjust to this. As we're developing our devotional practice, there may still be some heavy pinch that, yes, this hurts very much, and it takes a lot longer to process. However, those who are already experiencing a higher taste, although they may be interacting with the comings and goings of the modes of material nature, visiting us with their miseries and their so-called the windfalls of life, the person isn't as affected by such a thing because their consciousness is not really married to the situation. I mean, that's where we have the problem, is this is my situation. But as an example, Sri Uddhava was already engaging in the spiritual world as he was in this world. So if something happens in this world that he has to wrestle himself from his engagement in the spiritual world to actually engage here. So I'm saying there are gradations. It's not all the same for everybody. But I do agree with you that we can't categorically just say that, well, because this is philosophically true, therefore devotees don't go through anxiety. They may go through anxiety. But in that, there's a kind of fire that helps us to come to an understanding of how things work in the world, and that's where maturity comes from. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
Dandavat Pranam. A few days ago, we were reading the Jarabharat when he's talking to King Rahugana, and there's a line I think it's in the purport. I don't think it's actually in the verse, I'm not sure, but there's a line that, like, after kind of the whole thing has happened, and Rahugana has really apologized for being such a terrible king and being so offensive, and he's accepted and he's taking instructions. There's a line in a purport about how Jarabharat had in fact actually been a little disturbed in his mind, but not in his soul. I wish I could remember where it is, because it's like 3 chapters, but that like it said something about how there's an ocean, and sometimes the ocean has some waves, but the ocean is not actually moving or disturbed. Like, it looks like it's disturbed, but it's not. And this really struck me, because I think sometimes when we see devotees even having interactions and somebody seems a little disturbed or upset, we can be like, oh, what does it mean to be equipoised? Or what does it mean not to feel your suffering? And the idea that it happens, but it happens on a different time scale than the thing. Like, the waves are moving, but the ocean is not moving at some level. And so that came to mind from this point. And then the end of this purport, the very end where he's like the goal, this reminded me of a conversation I had recently with a devotee friend who's like way, way, way more serious than I am. And they were telling me about something, you know, some great suffering they had. And I was like, oh, this is really, I'm really sorry. And then they said something like, well, but it's not going to push me from my goal. Like my goal, they were very like, doesn't matter because I still have this goal, the most important thing. And they kept saying the most important thing is bhakti. And I was like, wow, I definitely am not there yet. But it's exactly at like the end of this purport. And so when you see that in somebody, you can at least aspire to, I can at least aspire to it.
Thank you. Excellent point. And I've noted many times that section of Jad Bharat and where he becomes angry and expressed his anger. There's a difference, however. It's called productive anger. There's productive anger. There's an example of this given by Giriraj Swami in his new book, I'll Build You a Temple. It's about the Juhu story. And he notes one day about how Srila Prabhupada had been inspecting devotees' living quarters. One of them, nobody expected that he was going to go up there. One of them, the door was locked, somebody got the key, they went in there and it was in perfect order. And Prabhupada was appreciative because it wasn't like they had time to get ready. So that meant he liked it when he saw that devotees were living in an orderly, clean way. It indicates the consciousness of that person. And then he went upstairs and there were some rickety stairs he was going up. Everyone said, no, Prabhupada, don't go up there. And Prabhupada's like, I'm going up there. So he went up, and on the loft up there were some books, transcendental books, that weren't being kept properly. I won't go into all the details how they weren't being kept properly, but they were really in bad shape. And Prabhupada became extremely angry. Nobody was spared. And the devotees were afraid to, a few hours later, go to the darshan that Prabhupada gave regularly, because they thought, it's like we're going to, he burned us to ashes. Now what's going to happen? And he went there, and it was it. And so Giriraj Maharaj notes the difference, the way Prabhupada got angry. Some people lose their temper. Other people use their temper because of being methodical but dispassionate. Yes, you can be angry, but not be touched by the contamination that comes from anger when you lose it. And it's similar with the miseries. There's a way in which the miseries of life, we can look at them, absorb them. It's part of this phenomena of vidyam cha yas. And not that they don't touch us, but there's a way in which Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita, Brahmanyadaya karamani sangham tyakva karotiya. Lipitena sapapena padma patram ivam basa. So this means that if your intention is different, the way you're working in the world, even if there was a cause to be smeared by the effects of the three modes of material nature, because your intention is, I'm offering this to Krishna, then you're not touched by it. It doesn't affect you in the same way. And this is the interesting process. Devotees are not one-dimensional, and they're also not... it's not that they don't exhibit, like even Krishna, after Kurukshetra, he's there in the first canto of the Bhagavatam with the bereaved families, and he's there with them, holding their hands. They're all going through it together. But it's different. It's still different. It's the art of working in the world, moving in the world, Krishna says, without being touched by it at all. But you learn from it nonetheless. It's productive. I forgot the order, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
So, in the neophyte stages of Krishna consciousness, when devotees or aspiring devotees go through suffering, in order to, in a mechanism to protect themselves, they might become hard-hearted. So, what is the guidance you would provide to them to avoid such a stage and maintain a soft heart so that we can still continue to receive the mercy of the Lord and accept the association of devotees?
What I've noticed is those devotees who early on find a senior mentor who's already been through a lot of stuff, who's mature. There's no replacement for maturity. You can't just manufacture it. Let's cook up a little maturity. And it's like, yeah, throw it on these people. Now they're mature. That's why there's a parampara. You have to have mature people around. Mature means they practice it, they blew it many times, they know what it means to make a comeback. They're there for you. And I notice the difference in people who have senior mentors. They're different. They're aligned because they have some shiksha guru, that's there for them, that they can process. Say, what do I do now? Now it's real. This is impossible. What do I do? It's not impossible. Here's how here's how it goes. And if you have that throughout your life, then you can avoid the ways in which you misinterpret the Shastra due to immaturity, and you take it in a way that is not helpful. But you can see the nuance by taking it from people. I mean, you can read a lot about how devotees in the early days had all kinds of problems. And for instance, Acharya Rishi Prabhu, who used to be the GBC for the Bay Area, was very productive, several restaurants at the same time going on in San Francisco. And there was a letter he wrote to Prabhupada saying, like, I don't get it. The devotees are fighting. How is this spiritual? Isn't the spiritual world is no fighting? And if these people are so enlightened, why are they hitting each other? And Prabhupada wrote back and he said, it's because of the individuality of the soul. Who else is going to tell you that? He said, because we're all individuals eternally, we have difference of opinion. He said, even in the spiritual world, there's difference of opinion. Chandravali's there, Radharani's there, different camps, and there's anomalies. He said, even in the spiritual world, sometimes Krishna milks a bull instead of the cow because he's so bewildered by Srimati Radharani. I mean, he threw in something so esoteric, but he explained that your idea, he said to Acharya Rishi, Prabhu's disciple, that there should be, evenness, no fighting, no differences, and things like that. He said that's not only utopian, but it's Mayavad. And so, what a perspective, a mature perspective of how to deal with infighting. Otherwise, I mean, millions of times, and millions of times a day these days, and all the police radios I'm on from around the world, listening to this conference, that conference, saying, squawk, listen to this guy said that to this guy. And you could just say, hey, what kind of spiritual thing is this? But I have, that guidance from the most mature Vaishnav who could tell us. So we have to have that on an ongoing basis in order to process all the different anomalies that we come across that seem like imponderables. Okay? All right.
Thank you, Vaisesika Prabhu. So, in this purport and in this verse, it talks about how these happiness and these miseries come of their own accord, regardless of how we are working. And there's a lot of propaganda, especially in the United States, to bring us to the fruitive mentality, to give us the idea that everything is obtained by our work that we do in this life. And so this is really striking, that actually what we experience, a lot of it is not due to some of it is due to the work that we do in this life, but a lot of it is not under our control in this life. So it is ultimately under our control, but we've already been here for many lifetimes before. So right now, what we do is not necessarily going to lead to that fruit. And so that's another aspect in which, if one is mature and one has worked for some time, then one realizes that at different periods of one's life, in one period, one is working very hard and then the result doesn't come about. And in another period, one is working maybe not quite so hard, and results come very easily. So one can experience that in one's own life, or one can see that in other people's lives, that, you know, someone is working 3 jobs and can barely make it, and some other person is you know, has a trust fund and they don't need anything. So that was my reflection from this verse, that this can counteract that propaganda which is there to, you know, for people who can take advantage of people's working very hard.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, and I think people after some time have this realization that I've done everything I'm supposed to do. Why am I getting a different result? I mean, eventually everybody gets that to one degree or another. And the only place to really take shelter is of this higher perspective, which comes in the form of this benevolent voice from the Srimad-Bhagavatam. I mean, who thinks like this? As you're pointing out, there's propaganda, otherwise just lean into it harder. It's like, I leaned into it really hard, and it didn't produce the result. But there's so much comforting voice, actually, in this information that there's an aggregate of work that you've done that's calculated and which has caused the momentum into your life. And that gives such a reassuring kind of context of life. And it also helps to develop better qualities, because then if one understands karma, then obviously you want to be avowedly truthful. You know, somebody gives you too much money and you run after them and say, here, take it back. And they're like, what? You know, nowadays people don't have that sense of causality. Those who are most advanced, they see consequences, what happens, and that I'm causing things to come back to me. Therefore, I'll be very careful in the way I work in the world. Makes for this philosophy from the Bhagavatam makes for a better world, for better people. Okay, thank you so much. We'll just take 2 more so everyone can stand up and we'll have kirtan.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
So as you're reading the purport, I remembered one presentation called "Is Everything Destined in Life?" And in that presentation, very systematically points out that material life cannot be appreciably changed despite our hard work. And then there is another point about, but our spiritual progress, there is no parameters to control or restrict. And it goes on to say further, but by investing into your spiritual progress, even the material difficulties, you are guarded, safeguarded against them. And I remember another class by His Holiness Bhakti Rasamrita Swami Maharaj. Pain is mandatory, but suffering is optional. So such a powerful way to think about. And you yourself mentioned in one of the classes of how we can see the pain as an intermediary exam. Death is like the final exam, and we are not prepared for it. And in our youth, it feels like an abstract concept, and we don't really get the urgency to work on ourselves and improve spiritually. And you mentioned how these middle pain points, they actually tell us how far we are from our final destination. So instead of becoming morose, and we actually become very happy that Krishna has given me an exam now. Let me see, I may fail, but this is an opportunity for me to progress more. Thank you much.
Thank you very much. Let's look up the word suffering. I know it has a very helpful etymological root to confirm the point you made about pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Pardon me? Pain is mandatory? Suffering is optional? Yes.
Suffering, it's a noun. It's the state of undergoing pain, distress, or hardship. And it originally comes from Latin sub, and then sub-feri, and then it went to sub-feri, and then
means.
So sub means from below, and feri means to bear, and then it went to sub-feri, and then it went to Norman French, which is sufferer, and then suffer, which is Middle English.
Okay. You have anything more?
This is from the etymologic dictionary, and suffering is a noun. It means patient enduring of pain, inconvenience, loss, etc. mid-14th century, undergoing of punishment, affliction, and then late 14th century, it's a verbal noun from suffer, which means a painful condition. Pain is felt.
Okay, not as helpful as I thought. What?
Pain is felt.
Pain is felt. Okay, yeah. All right, not as clear cut. Govinda, did you have one last point? He has Shastra back there, as usual. Don't give up so easily. We'll get you a mic.
Hare Krishna, sorry. So I just, when Shyam Jagannath Prabhu was talking about how miseries don't touch devotees that much or don't affect, I was reminded of the verse that Prahlad Maharaj actually says to Narsimdev in the Stuti that Na udvije paradurte vaitaranya tvat virya gayan maha amrita magna chittaha. Right? So he says basically, I am not disturbed by this material world. Na udvije paradurate vaitaranya. It's very difficult to cross this Vaitarani river. But because the reason is Tvat virya gayan maha amrita magna chitta. My consciousness is completely immersed in glorifying your transcendental pastimes and power. So, this is the great blessing that devotees have, that everything will come to us, but we have this sheath that cannot be penetrated,
Such an excellent point. The second part of the verse, Shoche tato vimukachetasa indriyarta maya sukaya bharam udvahato vimudhan. He says so. I'm not worried. I have no problem. But shoche, I'm lamenting. Shoche tato vimuka chetasa indriyarta. I worried about all the people of the world who are watching CNN and they think this is the whole thing, or whatever the counterpart of that is. But that everyone's wallowing in ignorance and therefore they're suffering. That's where my anxiety is. So devotee doesn't worry for him or herself, but worries because of the suffering of others. And this is the highest method of worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is to take that kind of anxiety. This is mentioned by Lord Shiva when, or Shukadev Goswami, after Shiva drinks the ocean of poison, and he says about Shiva, Tapyante lokatapena sarava prayasojana parama aradanam taddi purushasya akilatmana. That this is the characteristics of the greatest souls, and that is they take voluntary suffering upon themselves because of the suffering of others. They try to rectify it to help other people by giving them spiritual knowledge. Om Tat Sat. Thank you very much, everyone, for sitting here at Naimisharanya for the discussion of the Srimad-Bhagavatam. And now we're going to